The suffocating heat of the meeting room on the 23rd floor of the corporate building in New York contrasted with the coldness emanating from the head of the table. Patricia Miller, CEO of Miller & Associates, drummed her perfectly manicured red nails against the mahogany surface, while 15 executives waited in tense silence. The air conditioning had failed again, and sweat was beginning to mark the dress shirts of the men present. The door opened discreetly, and a man in a blue jumpsuit entered carrying a toolbox. Graying hair, a sun-weathered face, calloused hands. Robert Smith was 45 years old and worked in the building's maintenance. His steps were silent as he made his way to the air conditioning panel on the side wall. Patricia looked up from the spreadsheet she was analyzing, her face contorting into an expression of disdain. "How convenient," she said aloud, interrupting the CFO's presentation. "Just as we're discussing the quarterly results, we're interrupted by this." Robert didn't respond, just opened his box and began checking the unit's components. He was familiar with this kind of situation. 6 months working in this building had taught him that invisibility was the best strategy when crossing the path of certain people. "I'm talking to you," Patricia raised her voice. "Didn't you hear we're in an important meeting?" Robert turned slowly, the screwdriver still in his hand. "Sorry, Mum. I was ordered to fix the air conditioning urgently. The request came from this room." "Request?" Patricia pronounced the word with scorn. "Do you know how much every minute of these people's time is worth?" She gestured to the executives around the table. "While you fiddle with your little tools, we're losing money. But of course, how would you understand something like that?" One of the directors, Michael Fontana, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Patricia, perhaps we can let the man work and continue—" "No, Michael." Patricia stood up, her high heels echoing on the marble floor as she walked toward Robert. "This is exactly the problem with this company. Lack of standards. Lack of excellence." She stopped just inches from him, her dark eyes glittering with something close to pleasure. "Look at him. Dirty jumpsuit, smelling of grease. And here we are, trying to close million-dollar deals." Robert maintained a neutral expression, but his brown eyes observed every detail of the woman. The rigid posture, the raised chin, the way she savored each humiliating word. He had seen this pattern many times in recent weeks. Patricia Miller had built a small empire of fear on that floor. "Ma'am, if you'll allow me, I'll just fix the unit and leave," Robert said calmly. "If you'll allow me," Patricia repeated in a mocking tone, provoking nervous laughter from some of the executives. "How polite. How chivalrous." She turned to the others. "Look at that. We have a Prince Charming among us." The head of Human Resources, Helen Carter, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This was going too far, even for Patricia's standards. But she knew that intervening would mean becoming the next target. Patricia walked to the panoramic window overlooking the company helipad. The corporate helicopter, a modern imported model, rested majestically under the afternoon New York sun. "Do you know what that is?" she asked Robert, pointing to the aircraft. "A helicopter, ma'am." "It's not just a helicopter. It's a symbol of power, of success, of people who have reached the top." Patricia turned with a cruel smile on her lips. People who don't fix air conditioners. The silence in the room was almost palpable. Some executives looked down at their folders, others at their laptop screens, anything to avoid witnessing the humiliation. "Can you fly, Mr.—" Patricia paused theatrically. "What's your name again?" "Robert Smith. Mr. Robert Smith." She let out a crystalline laugh. "Can you fly that machine out there, Mr. Smith?" Robert slowly closed his toolbox. "Yes, I can." The answer caught Patricia by surprise for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "Of course you can. And I perform brain surgery in my spare time." More nervous laughter echoed through the room. "I'm not joking, ma'am," Robert said, his voice still calm but with a firmness that wasn't there before. Patricia crossed her arms, amused by what she considered a pathetic attempt to regain dignity. "All right, I'll make you a proposition." She looked around the table, making sure everyone was paying attention. "You fly that helicopter. Just one takeoff and one landing and I'll marry you right here in front of everyone." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Helen closed her eyes, feeling a headache forming. This had crossed every line of professionalism. "Are you serious?" Robert asked. "Absolutely," Patricia replied with a victorious smile. "But we both know you don't have the slightest idea how to turn that thing on, let alone make it fly. So this is just my way of making it clear where everyone's place is here." Robert remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on hers. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he slowly nodded. "I accept." "What?" Patricia blinked, confused. "I accept your challenge," Robert repeated. "But on one condition." "What condition?" She practically spat the words. "That you honor your word, in front of everyone present here. If I fly that helicopter, you keep your promise." Patricia let out a genuine laugh now, turning to the other executives. "Are you hearing this? He really thinks—" She stopped, assessing the situation. There was no risk. The man was a simple maintenance worker. He'd probably never even been close to a helicopter in his life. "You know what? I accept. And what's more, I'll make this interesting." She took out her phone and began typing quickly. "I'm sending a message to all departments. IT, marketing, sales. I want everyone to come to the helipad to witness this." Her fingers flew across the screen. "If you're going to provide me with entertainment, it might as well be in front of a proper audience." Robert just watched as she sent the messages, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of his lips. "As you wish, ma'am." "Oh, I do wish," Patricia confirmed, her eyes shining with anticipation. "I'll meet you on the helipad in 15 minutes, enough time for you to back out or for me to gather an audience worthy of your humiliation." "I'll be there," Robert said simply. He picked up his toolbox and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. As soon as he was gone, Helen stood up. "Patricia, this is insane. You can't." "I can and I will," Patricia cut her off. "This man needs to learn a lesson about knowing his place, and everyone in this company is going to witness it." Michael tried again. "But what if, for some reason, he actually knows how to—" "Knows how to what?" Patricia interrupted him impatiently. "Fly a helicopter, a maintenance worker who probably barely finished high school? Please." She grabbed her designer handbag. "Let's go. I don't want to miss the show." The executives rose slowly, exchanging worried glances. None of them knew exactly what was going to happen, but they all felt that something was about to change in that building. The tension in the air was almost electric as they followed Patricia to the elevator. The helipad on top of the building was starting to fill up. Patricia's message had spread like wildfire through the corporate corridors. Employees from every department left their desks, curious to witness what promised to be a memorable spectacle. Some held up their phones, ready to record, while others commented in small groups about the maintenance workers' audacity. Patricia stood in the center of the helipad, clearly delighting in the attention. She had touched up her makeup and adjusted the red blazer she wore over a tight black dress. She looked like a reality show host about to announce a contestant's elimination. "Where is our star pilot?" she asked loudly, drawing laughter from the growing crowd. About 80 people were already gathered around the helipad, keeping a safe distance from the helicopter. Did he give up? Did he finally understand the difference between fixing an air conditioner and flying a $2 million aircraft? Helen was there, but standing away from the main group next to Michael and 2 other directors. Her stomach was in knots. This was wrong on so many levels, she didn't even know where to begin. She pulled out her phone and started typing an email to the legal department, but she hesitated. What exactly would she say? That the CEO was betting a marriage with an employee? It sounded too absurd even for Miller and Associates. "There!" someone shouted, pointing to the helipad access door. Robert emerged, but he was no longer the same man in a dirty jumpsuit. He had changed. He now wore clean jeans, a light blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and casual shoes. His face was washed, his hair combed back. He walked with firm, confident steps, the toolbox replaced by a small black backpack. A murmur went through the crowd. Some seemed surprised by the transformation. Others commented among themselves that at least he had the dignity to show up looking decent. Patricia watched him approach with a mixture of irritation and amusement. "Well, look at that. Our handyman cleaned up. How cute." She clapped slowly and sarcastically. But tell me, Mr. Smith, do nice clothes make a helicopter fly? Robert stopped a few feet from her. No, ma'am, but knowledge and skill do. What an inspiring answer, Patricia retorted. You know what? Since you went to the trouble of coming all the way up here, of changing your clothes as if you were going to a wedding, she paused dramatically. I'm going to make this even more interesting. Helen felt her blood run cold. No, she's not going to. If you actually manage to fly that helicopter, Patricia announced loudly to the entire audience, in addition to marrying you, I'll give you a $50,000 bonus in cash. The crowd reacted with gasps of surprise. $50,000 was almost a year's salary for many of the employees present. But, Patricia raised a perfectly manicured finger, if you fail, and by fail I mean not even managing to start the engine of this machine, you will resign. Here, now, in front of everyone. The silence that followed was deafening. Helen took a step forward, ready to intervene, but Michael held her by the arm. Don't, he whispered. She'll destroy you if you interfere now. This is absurd, Helen hissed back. It's abuse of power, it's a lot of things, Michael agreed. But if you get involved now, you'll be fired by the end of the day. Robert remained still, processing the new terms. His eyes scanned the crowd, seeing the faces of people he had observed for the past 6 months. The receptionist who always smiled, but whom he'd seen crying in the bathroom after being publicly reprimanded. The IT analyst who was developing an ulcer from stress. The marketing intern who trembled every time she had to present something to the board. I accept, he said finally. Patricia blinked, clearly not expecting him to agree to such unfavorable terms. For a moment a shadow of doubt crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by renewed arrogance. Excellent, then let's get this circus started. She turned to the head of security. Frank, do you have the helicopter keys? Frank, a sturdy man in his 50s, nodded and walked over to them. Ms. Miller, with all due respect, the helicopter is company property. I'm not sure if I can authorize. I am the CEO of this company, Patricia cut him off. If I say you can, you can. Or do you want to test my patience today too? Frank looked at Robert, then at Patricia, and finally handed over the key fob. As you wish, ma'am. Patricia tossed the keys to Robert, who caught them easily in mid-air. There you go, your one-way ticket to unemployment. She turned to the crowd. I want everyone to pay close attention to what's about to happen. I want you to record it, take pictures, post it on social media if you want, because this is a lesson about reality, about knowing your limitations, about not trying to be something you're not. Robert simply nodded and began walking toward the helicopter. The crowd parted, making way for him. Some already had their phones raised, recording every second. 30 seconds, Patricia shouted at his back. I give you 30 seconds until you give up. Robert reached the aircraft, an impeccably maintained Bell 407 model. He circled the helicopter slowly, checking the rotor blades, the landing skids, the fuselage. His movements were methodical, professional. Look at that, someone in the crowd commented. He at least knows how to pretend he understands. It's just for show, another replied. He must have seen it in a movie. Helen watched with her hands pressed against her chest. There was something in the way Robert moved around the aircraft that didn't seem amateurish. It seemed experienced. Robert opened the pilot's door and climbed in. Through the glass, everyone could see him adjusting the seat, fastening the seatbelt, picking up the headset. He began a series of checks, his fingers moving over the controls with unsettling familiarity. What is he doing? Patricia asked Frank, irritation growing in her voice. Pre-flight checklist, Frank replied, his voice neutral but his eyes wide. He's doing the correct checklist. Impossible, Patricia scoffed. He must have memorized it from some YouTube video. But her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Something was wrong. The man inside, the helicopter didn't move like someone who was pretending. He moved like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Helen discreetly moved away from the crowd and called her assistant. Mike, I need you to check something urgently. Employee named Robert Smith. Maintenance. I want to see his complete file. Now. Now, Helen, Mike asked, confused. Now, she repeated with urgency. Inside the helicopter, Robert finished his visual checks and placed his hands on the controls. For a moment he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. 6 months. 6 months of observing, documenting, witnessing. 6 months of seeing good people broken by a toxic system. 6 months waiting for the right moment. This was the moment. He turned the ignition key. The engine began to come to life, a growing whine that quickly turned into a powerful roar. The rotor blades began to spin, slowly at first, then faster and faster, creating a downdraft that made the crowd step back even further. Patricia stood frozen, her smile fixed on her face. He started it. Michael and the other executives exchanged alarmed glances. Frank grabbed his radio. "Central, this is the helipad. We have a situation. I need to confirm flight authorizations for the corporate helicopter. It's urgent." The reply came crackling over the radio. "Confirming, Frank. Can you specify the nature of the urgency?" "We have someone about to attempt takeoff," Frank replied, his eyes fixed on the helicopter. "I need to know if he's authorized." Robert increased the power. The helicopter began to vibrate, the blades now a circular blur above their heads. Inside the cockpit, he checked the instruments one last time. All green, all perfect, as it should be. The deafening noise of the blades cutting through the air filled the entire helipad. Helen pressed the phone to her ear, trying to hear Mike on the other end. "What? I can't hear you." "I said there's an anomaly in his file," Mike shouted back. "The file shows strange access permissions, an authorization level I've never seen before." "What kind of authorization?" "Presidential approval, full access. Helen, this guy is not a simple maintenance worker." Helen hung up and ran to where Michael was standing. "We have to stop this, now." But it was too late. The helicopter began to lift off the ground, slowly, smoothly, like a leaf being lifted by a gentle breeze. 2 inches, 4, 8. Robert kept the aircraft perfectly level, the controls responding to every subtle touch of his fingers. The crowd erupted in exclamations of shock. Phones captured the moment from every possible angle. Some employees cheered, others simply stared, mouths agape. Patricia was as white as a sheet, her expensive handbag falling from her shoulder without her noticing. "No," she whispered, "it's not possible." The helicopter rose another 3 feet, now hovering steadily about 10 feet off the ground. Through the glass, everyone could see Robert focused on the instruments, his movements precise and confident. There was no hesitation, no nervousness, only the calm of someone doing something they knew intimately. Frank pressed the radio button again. "Central, the confirmation. Is he authorized or not?" The reply took a few agonizing seconds. Frank confirmed. "Maximum authorization, presidential level. I repeat, maximum authorization. The pilot has full permission to operate any company aircraft." Frank let the radio fall from his hand, stunned. "My God," he murmured. Helen reached his side. "What is it? What did they say?" "He's authorized," Frank replied, still processing the information. "Maximum authorization, presidential level." "That doesn't make sense," Michael said, having joined them. "Presidential level? But the company president has been traveling for months, ever since—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening. "No, it can't be." In the air, Robert began to execute maneuvers. First, a slow 360-degree rotation, the helicopter spinning on its own axis with pinpoint precision. The crowd watched, mesmerized. Then he raised the aircraft another 15 feet, held it steady for a few seconds, and then smoothly descended 10 feet. Every movement was controlled, professional, perfect. "He's not just flying," one of the IT analysts muttered. "He's putting on a show." "That's military training," another commented. Or, "He was a commercial pilot. Nobody flies like that without hundreds of hours of experience." Patricia finally found her voice, though it was trembling. "Stop this. Someone make him land. That's company property. He's going to destroy the helicopter." But no one moved. Everyone was transfixed by the spectacle in the sky. Robert executed another maneuver, this time moving the aircraft laterally, sliding through the air as if on invisible rails. Then he began his descent. The landing was even more impressive than the takeoff. Robert brought the helicopter down on the helipad with absolute perfection, adjusting the altitude inch by inch. When the skids touched the concrete, it was so gentle they barely made a sound. The engine began to spool down, the blades gradually slowing until they came to a complete stop. For a moment, no one moved. The silence that followed the roar of the engine was almost magical. Then someone started to clap. Soon another joined in, then another, until the entire helipad erupted in applause and cheers. Robert opened the door and stepped out of the helicopter. He removed the headset, hung it in its proper place, and carefully closed the door. Then, with the same calm as always, he walked toward Patricia. The CEO was petrified. Her face had gone through a range of colors, from pale white to furious red. Her fists were clenched, her nails digging into her palms. Around her, the executives who had previously laughed at her jokes now watched her with mixed expressions of shock, embarrassment, and something resembling satisfaction. "Satisfied, ma'am?" Robert asked when he stopped in front of her. Patricia opened and closed her mouth several times like a fish out of water. Her mind was racing, trying to find a way out, an explanation, anything that could reverse what had just happened. How? She finally managed to stammer. "Do you remember your promise?" Robert asked, his voice still calm but now with a steely edge. "In front of everyone present. You promised to marry me if I flew that helicopter." "That was a joke," Patricia exploded, finally finding her voice. "A joke? Did you really think I was serious?" "Funny," Robert replied, crossing his arms. "When you bet my job, it didn't seem like a joke. When you humiliated me in front of the board, it wasn't a joke. When you sent messages to every department to come watch my humiliation, were you laughing?" The crowd was silent now, every word being absorbed like water in a desert. Phones were still recording, capturing every second of the dramatic turnaround. "You tricked me," Patricia accused, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You pretended to be a regular employee when you're obviously a professional pilot. This is fraud." "I never pretended to be anything," Robert retorted. "You assumed, just like you assumed that someone in a maintenance jumpsuit couldn't have other skills, other stories, other abilities." Helen approached, her heart pounding. She had to know. "Who are you?" she asked directly. "Your file says you have presidential authorization. How does a maintenance worker have that kind of access?" Robert looked at her for a long moment. Helen had always been different from the other executives. He had watched her defend employees when she could, trying to soften Patricia's harshest blows. She deserved to know the truth. He took a card from his pocket. It wasn't an ordinary employee ID. It was black, with gold lettering. He held it out to Helen. Her hands trembled as she took the card. Her eyes scanned the information, and she felt her legs go weak. "It's not possible," she whispered. "What is it?" Michael asked, trying to see over her shoulder. "What does it say?" Helen turned the card so everyone could see. On the front, it read, "Robert S. Oliver, founder and owner." Below, in smaller letters, "Majority shareholder, 70%, full access." The impact of the revelation was like a bomb going off. Executives backed away, their faces turning pale. Employees exchanged incredulous looks. Someone dropped their phone, and Patricia simply froze, all the blood draining from her face. "You," she managed to say, her voice now a thread. "You're the owner of the company," Robert completed. "The founder you all thought was traveling the world for the past 6 months. But I was right here, working, watching, learning." He took a step toward Patricia, who instinctively recoiled. "Do you know why I came back? Because of the reports. Reports of an employee turnover rate that had tripled, allegations of workplace harassment that reached my office, stories of talented people leaving the company because they could no longer stand the toxic environment." Robert looked around, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "I built this company 20 years ago, with the promise that it would be a place where people were valued, where talent would be recognized, where everyone would have dignity. I came back to find out what had gone wrong, and I found it." His gaze returned to Patricia. "I found you, and I found a system that allowed someone like you to turn my dream into a nightmare for dozens of people." Patricia tried to speak, but no sound came out. She looked around, searching for support, but all eyes were on Robert. Even the executives who had once supported her now kept their distance as if she had some contagious disease. The warm afternoon New York wind blew across the helipad, but no one moved. It was as if everyone was under a spell, unable to fully process what they had just witnessed. The maintenance worker wasn't just any employee. He was the owner of everything. The building, the company, the helicopter he had just flown with mastery. Robert let the silence stretch for a few more seconds. He had learned over the years that sometimes the most powerful words were the ones left unsaid. Finally, he turned to Helen. "I need you to call. An emergency meeting with the entire board. Main conference room in 2 hours," he said, his voice firm but not aggressive. "And I want the complete human resources file for the last 2 years. All hires, terminations, promotions, and especially all formal complaints." Helen nodded quickly, still processing everything. "Yes, sir, immediately." "And Helen," Robert added, making her pause. "Thank you for trying to intervene earlier. I noticed." The words took Helen by surprise, and she felt her eyes burn. Finally, someone had noticed, someone had seen. She nodded again and hurried off, already typing furiously on her phone. Robert then turned to Patricia, who was still frozen in the same spot. The CEO, who minutes ago had exuded arrogance and power, now seemed small, vulnerable. Her body was tense, her shoulders hunched forward, as if trying to shield herself from an impending blow. "Patricia Miller," Robert said formally, "you are suspended from all your duties, effective immediately. You will wait in your office until I call you for a private conversation. You are not to contact any employees, access any company systems, or remove any documents. Is that clear?" "You can't do this," Patricia finally managed to say, her voice coming out as a desperate squeak. "I built this company's numbers. I increased profits by 40% in the last 2 years. You can't just—" "I can, and I am," Robert interrupted her. "And we'll talk about your numbers soon, about how much they really cost." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but the expression on Robert's face stopped her. There was no anger there, which was somehow even more frightening. There was only a cold, unshakable determination. "Michael," Robert called, looking at the CFO, "you are temporarily in charge of operations until I decide on the next management structure. I need you to keep everything running normally." Michael swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. You can count on me." "And all of you," Robert said, his voice now directed at the crowd of employees still watching. "Go back to work. I know you have many questions. You will get answers. But for now, I need you to trust that I'm here to fix things." The crowd began to disperse slowly, but the murmurs were incessant. Phones were still raised, recordings still rolling. Robert knew that in a matter of minutes this would be in every company WhatsApp group and probably on social media soon after. That was fine. He was prepared for it. Patricia started to walk away, her high heels clicking unevenly on the concrete, as if her legs couldn't decide whether to run or walk. Robert watched her go, remembering all the times he had seen her walk through those corridors in the past 6 months. Always with her head held high, always with that air of superiority. Now, she looked like a diminished version of herself. Frank approached, still holding the radio. "Mr. Oliver, I didn't know. If I had known who you were—" "I know." "Frank," Robert said gently. "And that was exactly the point. Nobody knew. And that's why I was able to see how things really work here when the owner isn't looking." Frank nodded, clearly still processing everything. "Were you really a pilot?" "That was one of the smoothest takeoffs I've ever seen." A small smile touched Robert's lips. "I flew helicopters for 15 years. I made deliveries to oil rigs before I started this company. I never forget where I came from, Frank. Never." 2 hours later, Robert was in the main conference room. He had gone back to the apartment. He had secretly kept 3 blocks from the office and changed. He now wore a flawlessly cut dark grey suit, a white shirt, and a navy blue tie. His hair was combed, his face cleanly shaven. The transformation was complete. Helen had worked quickly. The entire board was present, including the 15 executives who had witnessed the initial humiliation in the meeting room. They all looked uncomfortable, avoiding each other's eyes. On the table were stacks of printed documents, and a projector lit up the wall. Robert entered, and the silence was instantaneous. He walked to the head of the table and remained standing, his hands resting on the mahogany surface. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice calm but filled with authority. "I imagine you all know who I am by now. For those who still have doubts, I am Robert S. Oliver, founder and majority shareholder of this company, and I am extremely disappointed with what I've found here." He pressed a button on the remote, and the first image appeared on the screen. It was a graph showing the employee turnover rate. "In the last 2 years, our turnover has increased from 14% to 42%, Robert explained. "That's 3 times the average for our industry, 3 times. Can anyone here explain to me why this has happened?" No one answered. Michael cleared his throat. "Mr. Oliver, the market is competitive. Other companies are not the reason," Robert interrupted, moving to the next slide. "This is 83 formal complaints of workplace harassment in the last 18 months. 83. And do you know how many were actually investigated?" He let the question hang in the air. 7, he finally answered. "Only 7. The others were filed away, ignored, or the complainants were subtly pressured to withdraw. Their complaints." Helen sat to his right, her own files open. She had spent the last 2 hours revisiting cases that had always bothered her, but that she had no power to fight. Now, seeing it all laid out like this, she felt a mixture of validation and horror. "Let me tell you some stories," Robert continued, moving to the next slide. A photo of a smiling young woman appeared. Marina Sanders, a brilliant marketing analyst, 26 years old. She came here full of energy and ideas. After 8 months under Ms. Patricia Miller's management, she developed a severe panic disorder. She resigned and is still in psychiatric treatment today. He moved to the next photo. A middle-aged man. Charles Peterson, project manager, 15 years with the company, one of our most dedicated employees. He was publicly humiliated in a client meeting because a presentation had a typo. One typo, he had a nervous breakdown 2 weeks later and also resigned. Robert continued, photo after photo, story after story. Each one was a testament to the human cost of the management that had been allowed to thrive in his absence. The executives around the table began to look increasingly uncomfortable, some with their heads bowed, others with expressions of genuine shock. "But do you know what the worst part is?" Robert finally said, turning off the projector. "You knew. All of you knew what was happening. Some of you witnessed it, and you chose to do nothing." "Mr. Oliver," one of the directors, Paul Andrews, spoke hesitantly. "With all due respect, Patricia's numbers were undeniable. She increased our profits significantly." "Numbers," Robert repeated, his voice cold. "Let's talk about numbers then." He picked up one of the reports from the table. "Yes, profits increased. But do you know how? By cutting training, eliminating benefits, increasing workloads without increasing staff, pushing people to the breaking point." He threw the report onto the table. "This isn't sustainable growth. This is sucking the life out of people to inflate short-term numbers. And you, all of you, allowed it because it was convenient, because you also got bonuses based on those numbers." The silence was heavy, suffocating. No one could look directly at Robert. Robert let the silence stretch for almost a full minute. He wanted every word he had said to sink in deeply. He wanted these executives, people he himself had hired or promoted over the years, to truly understand the magnitude of what had happened while he was away. "Effective immediately," he finally continued, his voice now firmer, "the following changes will be implemented. First, an independent commission will be formed to investigate all harassment claims from the past 3 years, not 2 years. 3. This commission will have external members, experts in human resources and labor law, as well as representatives elected by the employees themselves." Helen began to write furiously, but Robert held up a hand. "No need to write, Helen. All of this is already documented and will be sent out officially later today." He turned his attention back to the group. "Second change, 0 tolerance for abusive managers. I don't care about their numbers. I don't care about their results. If anyone uses tactics of intimidation, public humiliation, or any form of harassment, they will be immediately suspended and investigated. Paul Andrews shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mr. Oliver, well, it's admirable, but the market is aggressive. Sometimes you have to be firm with the team to... There is a huge difference between being firm and being abusive. Robert cut him off. And if you can't see that difference, Paul, maybe it's time to rethink your position here. Paul paled and said nothing more. Third change, Robert continued, a complete audit of all HR decisions from the last 2 years. Hires, terminations, promotions, salary increases. I want to check for favoritism, discrimination, or retaliation against those who reported problems. Michael timidly raised his hand. Sir, that's going to take months and will cost... It will cost what's necessary, Robert said. Money can be recovered. Trust once lost may never be regained. What do you think is more important for the future of this company, Michael? Trust. Sir, Michael answered quickly. Exactly. Robert moved to the next point. Fourth change. New anonymous reporting channels will be established. I don't want anyone else to feel afraid to report a problem because they fear retaliation. The reports will go directly to the Independent Commission and to me personally. He walked slowly around the table, stopping behind some of the chairs, making eye contact with each executive. And finally, you. Each of you needs to decide right now if you are committed to this new direction. Because I will not accept half measures. Either you embrace a culture of respect, dignity and collaboration, or you look for a job elsewhere. It's that simple. But Mr. Oliver, one of the directors, Amanda Collins, spoke for the first time, her voice trembling. We really didn't know the extent of the problem. Patricia was very good at presenting things in a way that... You didn't know because you didn't want to know, Robert interrupted, but his voice was not aggressive. It was almost sad. You saw the signs, the people resigning, the tired faces, the tense silence in the hallways. But it was easier to focus on the pretty numbers in the quarterly, or reports than to investigate what was really happening. Amanda looked down, tears beginning to form. You're right, I saw it, and I did nothing. But now you can do something, Robert said, his voice softening slightly. All of you can. You can be part of the solution. You can help rebuild what was broken, but it will require courage. It will require you to speak up when you see something wrong, to defend your colleagues, to prioritize people over numbers. He returned to the head of the table. I'm going to give you all 1 week to think. If you decide to stay, great. We'll work together to fix this. If you decide to leave, that's fine too. There will be no retaliation. Just be honest with me and with yourselves about what you want. Helen raised her hand. Mr. Oliver, what about Patricia? I'm going to speak with her now, Robert replied, but I think we all know what the outcome of the formal investigation will be. He dismissed the meeting, and everyone filed out slowly, the weight of the conversation visible on their shoulders. Only Helen remained. I need you to accompany me, Robert said to her. I want a witness for the conversation I'm about to have. They walked through the corridors to Patricia's office. The CEO was sitting behind her imposing desk, but she no longer looked like the powerful woman from hours ago. Her blazer was thrown over a chair, her makeup was smudged, her eyes red from crying. When Robert and Helen entered, she stood up quickly. Finally, she said, trying to regain some authority in her voice. Are you going to explain this circus you've orchestrated, humiliating me in front of everyone? I orchestrated it, Robert asked calmly, closing the door behind him. Patricia, do you remember how this all started? I was there to fix an air conditioner. You were the one who decided to turn it into a spectacle. You deceived me, she accused, pointing a finger at him. Pretending to be a regular employee when you were the owner. That's dishonest. I never lied about who I was, Robert replied, sitting in one of the chairs in front of her desk. You simply assumed. Just like you assumed someone in a jumpsuit didn't deserve respect. Just like you assumed you could humiliate people without consequences. Patricia sank back into her chair, her hands trembling. I made this company grow. The numbers don't lie. You're right, Robert agreed. The numbers don't lie. But they don't tell the whole story either. He leaned forward. Marina Sanders. Do you remember her? Patricia frowned. Who? Exactly, Robert said softly. You don't even remember. A brilliant young woman you psychologically destroyed. She was just another number to you, another piece that didn't fit into your game. The corporate world is tough, Patricia said, but her voice lost its force. You have to be strong or you get trampled. I learned that the hard way. And so you decided to trample others first? Robert asked. Decided that since it was hard for you, it should be hard for everyone? Patricia didn't answer. Tears began to roll down her face, ruining what was left of her makeup. Do you know what's really sad? Robert continued. You have talent. You have skill. But somewhere along the way, you confused strength with cruelty. You confused leadership with domination. What's going to happen to me? Patricia finally asked, her voice now just a whisper. The Independent Commission will formally investigate all the complaints against you, Robert explained. Based on what I've already seen, I think we know what the outcome will be. You will be terminated for cause. Patricia closed her eyes, nodding slowly. A part of her had already expected this. But I'll give you a piece of advice, Robert said, standing up. Use this. Use this experience to learn, to grow, to become a better person. You're still young, you have time to change. How? She asked, opening her eyes. How do I change when this is all I know? You start by apologizing, Robert answered, to the people you hurt. Not all at once, not if they don't want to hear it, but to those who are willing. And then the next time you have power over someone, remember how you felt today. Remember that people are not numbers or pieces in a game. They are human beings with dreams, fears, and dignity. Patricia nodded again, tears still streaming. I'm sorry, she whispered. I really am. Don't tell me, Robert said. Tell them. He and Helen left the room, leaving Patricia alone with her thoughts and her tears. 3 weeks had passed since the day of the helicopter, as everyone in the company now referred to, that transformative moment. Monday morning arrived with a clear sky over New York, and the Miller & Associates building felt different. Not physically, but there was something in the air, a lightness that hadn't existed before. Robert walked the halls, now in his usual suits, but he kept the habit of greeting every person he passed. Secretaries, analysts, cleaning staff. Everyone received the same genuine smile and warm, "Good morning." The initial shock had given way to a gradual acceptance. The owner was back and he genuinely cared. In the IT department, Mike was working at his desk when Robert passed. "Fayaso Ochika, good morning, Mike. How's the new reporting system?" Mike nearly fell out of his chair, still not used to the company owner knowing his name. "Good morning, Mr. Oliver. It's working perfectly. We've already received 15 anonymous reports, all being processed by the Commission." "Great work," Robert said, giving the young man a friendly pat on the shoulder before moving on. "And your mother? I remember you mentioned she was sick last week." Mike was speechless for a moment. She's better, sir. Thank you for asking." Robert nodded and continued on his way, leaving Mike staring after him, with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. The boss actually remembered conversations, details, people. In the hallway, Robert stopped to look at a mural that had been installed the previous week. It was a large corkboard with the title, "Weekly Wins." Employees could put up sticky notes celebrating small achievements, personal or professional. There were dozens of them. Managed to finish the project without working late. Got positive feedback from my manager. 3 days without crying in the bathroom. This last one written anonymously, but which made Robert smile sadly. There were still wounds to heal, but they were starting. Twas, in the 10th floor break room, a group of employees was chatting animatedly. When Robert came in for coffee, there was a moment of silence, but it was no longer the tense silence of before. It was respect mixed with curiosity. "Please continue," Robert said, smiling. "Don't let me interrupt." One of the marketing analysts, Julia, gathered her courage. "Mr. Oliver, is it true that Ms. Miller has been permanently let go?" Robert nodded as he prepared his coffee. "It's true. The Commission concluded its investigation yesterday. She was terminated for cause due to the number and severity of the proven complaints." There was a collective sigh of relief. Julia continued hesitantly. "And they say she apologized to some people?" "That's also true," Robert confirmed. "She contacted 7 former and current employees to apologize personally. Not everyone agreed to speak with her, which is completely understandable, but some did. He took a sip of his coffee. You know, real change doesn't just happen by removing toxic people. It happens when those people recognize what they did and try to be better. I don't know if Patricia will succeed, but at least she's trying. An intern, Luke, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. Mr. Oliver, can I ask a question? Of course, Luke. Why didn't you just fire her on the first day? Why wait for the investigation? Robert leaned against the counter, thoughtful. Because due process matters. Because even though I knew what I would find, other people needed to see it, needed the validation of a formal investigation. And because, honestly, a small part of me wanted to give her the chance to recognize what she had done, to have that moment of clarity. And did she? Julia asked. She's having it, Robert replied. It's a process. But, yes, I think she's finally seeing the real impact of her actions. Back on the 23rd floor, Helen was in her new office, significantly larger than her previous one. As the director of HR, she now had an expanded team and resources she had never dreamed of. Her desk was covered in reports, but her face showed satisfaction, not stress. Robert knocked on the open door. Got a minute? Always, Mr. Oliver, she replied, gesturing to a chair. He entered and closed the door. I wanted you to see this before I present it to everyone. He placed a folder. On her desk, the final report. Helen opened it and began to read. Her eyes widened. 42 proven cases of harassment? That's more than half the complaints. And each one resulted in appropriate disciplinary action, Robert confirmed. 3 managers were fired, 5 received suspensions and are on probation with mandatory training, and we've implemented new quarterly anonymous feedback protocols for all managers. Helen continued reading, turning the pages quickly. The turnover rate has already dropped by 16%. In just 3 weeks, Robert said, allowing himself a small smile. People are starting to believe again that this can be a good place to work. We have 11 former employees who have asked to return, and we're evaluating each case individually. And Marina Sanders? Helen asked. I saw she agreed to come back. Yes, Robert confirmed, his face lighting up. I spoke with her personally last week. She's receiving company-paid psychological support and will work reduced hours until she feels ready. I'm not going to rush her. She comes back at her own pace. And Charles Peterson? He's also coming back next Monday, Robert answered, with a new team and the autonomy to manage his projects without micromanagement. He deserves this second chance. In fact, they all do. Helen turned a few more pages. And the financial numbers? She asked, reaching the last section of the report. Ah, yes, the famous numbers that justified everything. Robert leaned back in his chair. There was an 8% drop in immediate profit that was expected. We're investing heavily in training, benefits have been restored, and we've hired 20 new people to reduce the workload. Helen looked concerned. 8% is significant. But look here, Robert pointed to a graph. Long-term projections show that with the reduction in turnover, increased productivity from happier and more satisfied employees, and an improved company reputation, will not only recover that 8% in 6 months, but grow 20% above the old numbers within a year. Sustainable growth, Helen murmured, finally understanding the full vision. Exactly, Robert confirmed. Not numbers artificially inflated by exploitation, but real growth based on valued people who give their best because they want to, not because they're afraid. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. You know, Helen, when I founded this company, I had just left a job where I was treated as disposable. I swore to myself that if I ever had my own company, it would be different, and it was for a long time. But I got careless, and I almost lost it. But you didn't lose it, Helen said softly. You came back in time. I came back, he agreed, and I won't get careless again. Later that day, Robert called a town hall meeting. All employees were gathered in the main auditorium, something that hadn't happened in years. There was nervousness in the air, but also positive anticipation. The seats were completely filled, and some people stood in the side aisles. Robert took the stage without notes, without a PowerPoint, just him and a microphone. The auditorium fell completely silent. Good afternoon, everyone. I know the last few days have been intense, full of changes and revelations. I want to start with an apology. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. I apologize, he continued, his clear voice echoing through the auditorium, because I failed you. I built this company on clear values. I promised it would be a place where people were respected and valued. But then I stepped away. I trusted that the structure I created would sustain itself, and I was wrong. He paused, letting his words sink in. While I was away, a toxic culture took hold. People I should have protected were harmed. Talents I should have nurtured were wasted. And it all happened under my name, in my company. Marina was in the audience, one of the former employees who had agreed to return. Tears streamed down her face as she listened. Beside her, her colleague held her hand in silent support. I can't change the past, Robert said. I can't undo the pain that was caused, but I can promise you that this will never happen again, not while I'm here. And I will be here. I'm not stepping away again. He walked to the edge of the stage, his eyes scanning the audience. But I can't do this alone. I need every single one of you. I need you to speak up when you see something wrong. I need you to support each other. I need you to remember that profits are important, yes, but never at the cost of human dignity. Charles Peterson was also there, the manager who had suffered the nervous breakdown. He gave a slight nod when Robert made eye contact with him, and Robert returned the nod with an encouraging smile. You all saw what happened on the helipad, Robert continued, a small smile touching his lips. You saw an arrogant executive try to humiliate me, thinking I was just some unimportant maintenance worker. Nervous laughter echoed through the auditorium. But you know what that taught me. It taught me a lesson I should have already known. Never, ever underestimate someone because of their appearance, their job title, or their background. The janitor who cleans these rooms might have incredible stories. The receptionist might have hidden talents. The intern might have ideas that change everything. He pointed to different parts of the auditorium. How many of you have degrees hanging on your walls at home that no one here knows about? How many of you speak 3 languages but have never been asked? How many of you have skills, experiences, stories that could enrich this company if you were only heard? Several hands went up timidly. Robert nodded. Starting today, I want to listen. We are creating monthly forums where any employee can present ideas directly to the board. No need to go through 5 levels of management. A good idea is a good idea, no matter where it comes from. The auditorium reacted with murmurs of approval, because respect isn't something you earn because of your title. It's something every person deserves simply for being human. And in this company from now on, that's not just a nice speech, it's official policy. Applause started, shy at first, but quickly growing in volume and intensity. Robert waited for it to subside before continuing. I want to close with the lesson I learned from all of this, he said, his voice now softer but still clear. That helicopter out there, it needs a lot of things to fly. It needs fuel, maintenance, technology. But you know what it needs most? Respect. Respect for the procedures, for the limits, for the laws of physics. If you don't respect those things, it doesn't fly. It crashes. He looked around the auditorium, making eye contact with as many people as possible. This company is like that helicopter. It needs resources, strategy, hard work. But above all, it needs respect. Respect between colleagues, respect from managers for their teams, respect for every single person who walks through these doors. Because without that, we don't fly, we crash. So I'll repeat what I told the board. Respect is the true fuel that makes any helicopter take off. And as long as I'm here, we're going to have that fuel in abundance. The auditorium erupted in applause, this time without hesitation. People rose to their feet, some crying, some smiling, all feeling something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The sound was deafening, a release of months, perhaps years, of accumulated tension. Robert stepped down from the stage, and instead of leaving immediately, he stayed. He shook hands, listened to stories, accepted thanks and also more apologies. He wanted everyone to know it wasn't just talk. He was really there. He really cared. A cleaning lady, Connie, a woman in her 60s who had worked at the company for 15 years, approached him shyly. "Mr. Oliver." "Connie," Robert said warmly, recognizing her immediately from his months undercover. "How are you?" "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My son, he has special needs. I always needed to leave early on Tuesdays to take him to therapy. The old management threatened to fire me every time. Now, Helen said I can adjust my schedule without any problem." "Of course you can," Robert said, taking her hands in his. "Family comes first, always, and if there's any problem with that, anyone who questions you, you come talk to me directly." Connie began to cry and, without warning, hugged Robert. He hugged her back, feeling the weight of years of stress and fear finally being released from those tired shoulders. As the sun set over New York, casting a golden light on the building, Robert stood in his office looking out the window. Helen came in carrying more reports, but also a genuine smile he hadn't seen on her before. "The employee satisfaction numbers are in," she said, placing the paper on his desk. "A 53% increase in just 3 weeks. "It's a start," Robert said, "but we still have a lot of work to do." "Mr. Oliver," Helen said hesitantly, "can I ask a personal question?" "Of course." "Why did you really come back? I mean, you could have sent in consultants. You could have made changes from afar. Why disguise yourself as a maintenance worker?" Robert thought for a moment, watching the city lights begin to twinkle on. "Because numbers on a report don't tell the real story. You can have all the data in the world, but it doesn't show the look of fear in someone's eyes when their boss walks into the room. It doesn't show the tears in the bathroom. It doesn't show the families being affected by the stress brought home." He turned to face her. "I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to feel what my employees were feeling. And yes, I admit, a part of me wanted to understand who really cared about people and who only cared about power, who was complicit out of convenience and who truly didn't know the extent of the problem." "And the helicopter?" Helen asked with a smile. "Was that planned?" Robert laughed, a genuine laugh that lit up his face. "That was pure improvisation on Patricia's part. But when she made that challenge, I saw the opportunity. I saw the chance to give her every possible opportunity to reveal herself, to show her true character. And she did, repeatedly. Every time she could have stopped, could have backed down, she doubled down. It was her choice." "And now?" Helen asked. "What's the next step?" "Now," Robert said, turning back to the window, "we rebuild. Brick by brick, person by person. It will take time, but we're going to create the place I always wanted this company to be. In fact, better than it was before, because now we know what can go wrong if we're not vigilant." He picked up a framed photo from his desk. It was of him 20 years ago in front of a small rented office, smiling with hope in his eyes. "This guy here had a dream. I almost let that dream die. But it won't die. Not on my watch." Helen smiled. "You know, Mr. Oliver, I think you inspired a lot of people today, not just with what you said, but with what you did. You showed that it's possible to be successful without being cruel, that you can have profits without destroying people." "I hope so," Robert replied, "because that's what the world needs more of. Leaders who understand that their success is built on the backs of other people, and that they have a responsibility to take care of those people." On the helipad, the helicopter rested silently under the stars that were beginning to appear in the sky. In 3 weeks it had become a symbol, not of power or status, but of courage, dignity, and the importance of never underestimating anyone. The night wind blew gently through the still blades, creating an almost musical sound. The lights of the building shone in the New York night, and inside, hundreds of people worked with a renewed sense of purpose. In the hallways, conversations happened without fear. In the meeting rooms, ideas were debated with mutual respect. In the break room, genuine laughter echoed once more. And on every floor, in every department, people remembered the lesson they had learned. Respect, after all, was the true fuel that made everything fly. Robert stayed in the office late, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He wanted to see people leaving, saying goodnight to each other with smiles, without that desperate rush to escape a place they hated. He wanted to feel the difference in the air, that energy that only exists when people feel valued and respected. When he finally turned off the lights and left, he passed by the helipad one last time. He touched the helicopter's fuselage fondly, remembering that flight that changed everything. It wasn't the maneuvers or the technical skill that mattered. It was what that moment represented, the courage to challenge assumptions, to stand up for dignity, to prove that every human being deserves respect, regardless of their position or appearance. "Thank you," he whispered to the silent aircraft, "for giving me wings when I needed them most." And with that, Robert left the building, already planning for tomorrow, already thinking about how to continue this transformation, already dreaming of the future where his company would be not just profitable, but also a beacon of hope, showing that it's possible to do business with humanity.